Oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization, the energy source that has fueled humanity's remarkable progress. But hidden beneath this precious resource lies a terrifying threat, a black nightmare that can engulf entire oceans in an instant. From devastating oil spills that leave unhealable scars to brutal wars fought over control of this vital resource, oil is not just a source of life, but also a seed of destruction. In just 42 days, the Gulf War inflicted staggering destruction. Approximately 200,000 people lost their lives, $190 billion in economic losses were sustained, and an environmental catastrophe began. The destruction of 600 oil wells created towering infernos across Kuwait, spewing vast quantities of toxic smoke, acid rain, and soot into the atmosphere. Alongside this, an estimated 1.5 billion liters of oil poured into the Gulf's waters, enough to fill around 600 Olympic-sized swimming pools, transforming the once thriving ecosystems into pools of sludge and death. In 1990, Iraq, deep in debt after the Iran War, turned to oil-rich Kuwait. Iraq's economic lifeline was at stake, but with failed negotiations, Iraq took drastic measures. January 1991, Operation Desert Storm explodes onto the world stage. For 6 grueling weeks, the skies above Kuwait and Iraq roared with the thunder of coalition aircraft, the desert floor trembled under the weight of advancing tanks, and the nights were lit by the terrifying glow of explosions. A relentless barrage of air and ground attacks rained down upon the Iraqi forces, pushing them back inch by bloody inch. But victory came at a steep price. Military expenditures skyrocketed, straining the resources of nations involved. Thousands of soldiers on both sides paid the ultimate price, their lives sacrificed in the brutal struggle for control of the region, and as the Iraqi army retreated, they left behind a scorched and poisoned earth, igniting over 600 Kuwaiti oil wells in a final act of vengeful destruction. The towering infernos that erupted painted the sky black, casting a long, dark shadow over the future of the Gulf. This act of environmental terrorism would have far-reaching consequences, extending far beyond the battlefield and impacting the health and livelihoods of countless people for years to come. International environmental organizations immediately declared a state of emergency of the highest level in the Persian Gulf. However, because the war was still ongoing, it was not until March 1991 that people could begin to address the disaster. A coalition of 70 nations, 3 times larger than the military coalition against Iraq, joined to help Kuwait recover. However, due to the immense scale of the disaster, it was not until November 6, 1991, that the last oil well fire was extinguished. 90% of the fires were put out using seawater, sprayed from massive cannons on U.S. military aircraft. To protect water sources from contamination, they deployed approximately 40 kilometers of oil booms and 21 oil-water separators. Along with numerous oil-skimming vehicles, they recovered 58.8 million gallons of oil. Most of the oil had evaporated, only 1/8 was collected and 1/4 reached the shores. A significant portion of the $1.7 billion cleanup cost was funded by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Without this operation, experts estimated the oil wells would have burned for up to 5 years until the oil was depleted, and the resulting smoke would have been enough to bring the world closer to an ice age. Many consider this operation the third campaign of the Gulf War, following the 2 military campaigns, Desert Storm and Desert Sabre. It became known as Operation Desert Inferno. When the smoke cleared, Kuwait lay in ruins. Hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers experienced severe health problems, known as Gulf War Syndrome, attributed to inhaling toxic fumes from the burning oil, depleted uranium, and the excessive administration of anthrax vaccines. For the people of the Gulf region, an estimated 40,000 deaths in surrounding countries since 1991 have been linked to exposure to the toxic smoke. A significant number of babies were born with birth defects, particularly in Saudi Arabia, which bore the brunt of the pollution, followed by Kuwait, Iran, and Iraq. The oil fires also produced boil rain, contaminating 35,000 acres of Kuwaiti farmland, effectively destroying the agricultural sector and leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of livestock. The Gulf War ended in 1991, but its impact endures, a stark reminder of the costs of power and oil. As new conflicts arise, Kuwait's lesson echoes: sometimes, the cost of war is beyond what we can bear. $70 billion, 43,100 people, 6,470 vessels, dozens of aircraft. These cold, hard numbers only begin to reveal the devastating scale of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. But behind those numbers lie the tragedies of millions of lives, bankruptcy, despair, broken families, and a surge in crime. The habitats of countless marine species were decimated. It all stemmed from that fateful day, April 20th, 2010, when the Deepwater Horizon oil rig erupted in flames in the Gulf of Mexico, triggering one of the largest oil spills in American history, leaving an indelible scar on both the ocean and human lives. Deepwater Horizon embodied the ambition to conquer the vast energy resources beneath the ocean. BP, the oil giant, poured billions of dollars into this venture, but lurking beneath this apparent success were fatal flaws, negligence, complacency, and gaping holes in safety protocols turned a dream into a nightmare. Halliburton, the company hired by BP, was responsible for drilling and cementing the well. The project was divided into two phases. First, drilling and sealing the oil well with cement, then using a different rig for oil extraction. Halliburton had warned about the cement mixture's instability and the potential for oil leaks. In September 2009, BP employees discovered that Transocean, the company directly managing the rig, had failed to address 390 maintenance issues, many of them critical. Addressing these issues would have required 3,500 hours of labor, and as of the day of the disaster, it remained unclear which issues, if any, had been resolved. Driven by economic concerns, BP ignored these warnings, playing a dangerous game with nature. April 20th, 2010, a catastrophic explosion rocks the Deepwater Horizon. 11 lives are lost as the rig burns for over 24 hours before sinking to the ocean floor. The nightmare everyone feared had become a reality. Oil gushes from the well at a rate of 60,000 barrels per day, the equivalent of 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools, for 87 agonizing days. The Gulf of Mexico, once a vibrant ecosystem and source of life for millions, is choked with oil and death. A desperate battle to contain the spill begins. Thousands are mobilized, deploying chemical dispersants, booms, controlled burns, and even underwater robots. BP attempts to cap the well 3 times, but each attempt fails. By September 19th, the well was finally sealed. However, the environmental damage was immense, severely impacting marine life, the fishing industry, and tourism in the Gulf of Mexico. The Deepwater Horizon disaster serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked greed and environmental negligence. The Gulf of Mexico may never fully recover. BP paid billions of dollars in fines, but some things cannot be remedied with money. May 28, 1991, 1,300 kilometers off the coast of Angola, a silent scream is lost in the vastness of the Atlantic. The ABT Summer, a giant oil tanker, is consumed by fire and explodes. 1 million barrels of crude oil, enough to fill 150 Olympic swimming pools, ignite, turning the Atlantic into a sea of fire. 5 crew members lose their lives in the inferno. The remote location makes rescue efforts a desperate race against time. 1.9 million barrels of oil, one of the largest oil spills ever. A toxic tide spreads for hundreds of kilometers, leaving a trail of death and destruction in its wake. Marine life is decimated. The ocean's delicate balance is shattered. The ABT Summer disaster exposed the vulnerabilities of the oil shipping industry and the devastating consequences of inadequate safety measures. The true cost of the spill, environmental and economic, is still being felt today. July 19, 1979, the Caribbean Sea, 2 behemoths of the ocean collide in a maelstrom of fire and oil. The Atlantic Empress, one of the largest ships ever built, meets its fate. The collision rips through the tanker's hulls, igniting a massive inferno. The crew of the Atlantic Empress abandons ship, but 26 are lost to the raging flames and turbulent seas. The Aegean captain, though damaged, manages to contain the fire, but the Atlantic Empress is doomed. For days, the Atlantic Empress burns, spewing millions of gallons of crude oil into the Caribbean Sea, a spill far larger than the Exxon Valdez disaster a decade later. It becomes the largest oil spill from a tanker in history, a toxic tide that devastates marine life and pollutes pristine coastlines. The Atlantic Empress disaster serves as a stark warning of the catastrophic consequences of accidents at sea and the devastating impact of oil spills on the environment. It forced the shipping industry to confront its vulnerabilities and implement stricter safety protocols, a legacy bought at a terrible price. Kern County, California, 1909. The dream of black gold has turned into a nightmare. The Lakeview Gusher, once a symbol of promise and prosperity, transformed overnight into a colossal beast, uncontrollably spewing oil for nearly 2 years, roughly 9 million barrels, 1.2 billion liters, or the equivalent of 480 Olympic-sized swimming pools, converted fertile land into a vast Black Sea. March 1909, the unthinkable happens. Oil erupts from the Lakeview Gusher like a swirling, black cyclone, consuming everything in its path. Some newspapers reported that the oil column was visible from 35 miles away in Bakersfield. A special train ran daily, bringing onlookers to witness the spectacle. On windy days, these gawkers were drenched in an oily mist. Every attempt to cap the well failed initially. It took 18 months to finally bring it under control. Working under grueling conditions, crews constructed a 20-foot-tall circular sandbag embankment around the well, 100 feet in diameter. The containment pool finally reduced the gusher to a bubbling spout. In September 1911, the well's foundation finally collapsed, ending the torrent. Traces of this monumental event still mark the region. Just 100 feet from the original site, one finds stratified layers of congealed crude oil, sand, and soil, fossilized like lava from an ancient eruption. Remnants of the sandbag berm remain, with a historical marker and bronze plaque commemorating this sobering chapter.